Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, Marc Levy from the Associated Press is here. We're going to get to the big stories of the week, but first, my special interview with the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. We'll do that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, the Attorney General is sitting next to me. General Shapiro, welcome to the program. Now, you were on when you were a state House member. I don't think you were on when you were a county commissioner. You were down there in Montgomery County in that Philadelphia market, right?
It's good to be back with you, Terry. I always enjoy seeing you.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're glad to have you. All right, we got to start with the big news from the past week. You filed a lawsuit in federal court against the administration for its decision on contraceptives to allow certain religious organizations not to provide contraceptives for religious and moral reasons. I think I got that right. You're the lawyer. You'll correct me. What's the basis? Why did you do that?
Let me just respectfully correct the frame of the question on that. It's not about religious organizations. The way that this rule was written, it applies to basically any corporate CEO, any board of directors. They took a very, very narrow religious exemption, which I totally respect, and they blew it wide open to effectively allow anyone. Look, here's my issue with this. The president acted unlawfully. He violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. He violated statutory authority, and he also violated the rulemaking process. Look, Terry, put really simply, if you want to adopt a new rule, and any president has the authority to do that, President Trump, President Obama, President Reagan, anybody, you have to publish the fact that you're going to put a new rule in effect. You then publish the new rule. You then allow for public comment, and then you publish the final rule based on that process.
Regardless of whether you agree with what he did or not, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I'm going to get to that. I mean, at the end of the day, no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. And in this case, he violated the rule of law. Now, Terry, your next question should be, why aren't you just suing him because you disagree with the president? There's a lot I disagree with the president on, and obviously he was not my choice to be president. But at the end of the day, you have to uphold the rule of law in the job that I'm in as your Attorney General. And I've made it very, very clear that no one is above the law, and we have to apply the law without fear and without favor. And in this case, the president's not only violating the rule of law, he's negatively impacting 2.5 million women in Pennsylvania that depend on getting access to contraception, and this rule makes it more difficult.
If I understand it, there are about 55 million people nationally who use contraceptive through their insurance under the Affordable Care Act.
That's correct.
If I got that correct. The second point I would make here, and it's, so your argument is not that he carved out a narrow religious exemption, which I think existed in the Hobby Lobby decision, where small corporations, you couldn't have a big publicly owned corporation. If you have religious grounds for it, the court said that's okay. So you have a very different concern that you're expressing here about this.
Right. There was a narrow religious exemption that existed. That's okay. But what they did was they created a, quote, moral exception and allowed publicly traded for-profit companies and others to use it. So now here's what happens, right? You've got some major employer in Pennsylvania, and the CEO there says a woman shouldn't have access to contraception. And by the way, 50% of women use contraception not for birth control reasons, but for other health reasons.
For medical reasons.
Right, for medical reasons. And so a doctor then turns around and says, you can't do it. By the way, that adds an extra $1,200 to a total cost for a woman to gain access to that care. The courts and others have determined, the legislature, Congress in this case, has determined that it is statutorily an obligation to have it provided. The president violated the rule and violated the law.
I'm glad you're on here to make that clear, because some of the press accounts, not about what you did, but about the whole business, did not exactly frame it the way you did, and I think that's important. All right, I don't even know where to begin with the Equifax data breach. I know that's something your office has been working on. And I don't even know what you do when every day almost we read a report where, there's a data breach here, there's a data breach there, and all of a sudden you're so vulnerable given the fact that we use this, you know what I'm saying, the internet, and everything is so public now. What's your argument about the Equifax? You filed, you're again another court suit.
I mean, Terry, as you know, I've made consumer protection a top priority in the Attorney General's office. It hasn't always been done that way, but my view is it's my job to protect the consumers of Pennsylvania. And in this case, the Equifax data breach affected 5.5 million Pennsylvanians, largest data breach in the history of our country. Equifax's only job was to protect your data. That's their job. And by the way, I don't know about you, Terry, but I didn't hire Equifax. I didn't choose Equifax. They were chosen for me because of the way the system works.
I didn't hire them either.
Right. And so they've now lost our data. The day I learned about this breach, I charged my Bureau of Consumer Protection with launching an investigation and reaching out to other attorneys general across the country. I now have 47 attorneys general I'm working with.
Oh yeah, I saw the number was huge.
We are leading this investigation. We will get to the bottom of it, and we'll hold Equifax accountable.
I have another question, but we got to run to a break. We'll do that, and we'll come back. I have a question on this subject and at least one more for the Attorney General. We'll see you in a minute.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. The Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania is my special guest, Josh Shapiro, former House member, former Montgomery County Commissioner. I got to throw all that biography in. Although you have a good suggestion in the information that you and your office has put out, and that's about signing up for credit monitoring and identity theft protection. That's taken on added importance in all this, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the Equifax data breach, right? So there's many layers to this, Terry, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. The first things first, the data breach occurs. Then Equifax waits 6 weeks, if not more, to notify the public and notify the Commonwealth and others about the data breach. So we're going to get to the bottom of why there was a breach. And then their corporate behavior since then has been atrocious. It's been horrible. Forcing people to try and give up their legal rights when they signed up to freeze their credit, forcing people to actually pay to have their credit monitored or frozen. We've gone after Equifax on that, and they have, come back from that. They're not charging people anymore for credit freezes. They're not forcing people to give up on their legal rights. So we're going to hold them accountable during the investigation. We're getting to the bottom of this investigation, getting people answers. And ultimately, we're going to need reform. We're going to need reform in the states. We're going to need reform at the federal level. But right now, what I'm telling consumers is monitor your credit. If you don't need, you're not in the position where you're buying a house or a cell phone or a car or something like that, where you're needing to access your credit, freeze your credit right now. It's an important step you could take to protect yourself.
Great advice from the Attorney General. All right, I have to ask you about, we've done a variety of shows on this. It's a subject that won't go away. It's critically important. It's opioid abuse, the overdoses. What can, obviously money, the legislature, has appropriated money. Governor Wolf has been a staunch support. This doesn't have a party. This is not a Democratic-Republican issue, as often we see in activities in the legislature. How do you, you've been routinely prosecuting folks who have been responsible in part for the delivery, the buying, and the selling. Talk about where you think that all stands.
Not only is this not a Democratic or Republican issue, it knows no municipal bounds. Black, white, brown, rich, poor, male, female. This is affecting everyone. Terry, we're losing 13 Pennsylvanians every single day due to this crisis. So here's what we need to do. We need a multidisciplinary approach, and this is exactly what we're doing. Number one, arrest the dealers. We have dramatically increased the number of arrests of dealers all across Pennsylvania. And part of that is arresting doctors and others who divert legal prescription drugs for illegal use. Just yesterday, we arrested another doctor. We've doubled the number of diversion
now,
arrests we've had.
Let me stop you here. You're not talking about doctors who are trying to help their patients who...
No, I'm talking about doctors who take a legal prescription drug and sell it for sex or sell it for money, things like that. We've arrested docs across Pennsylvania for that. We also need to get at the supply chain. And Terry, 80% of heroin addicts start their path to addiction with a legal prescription drug. So that's why I'm going after the pharmaceutical industry. We've launched an investigation and targeted 8 specific companies. We are going to hold the opioid manufacturing industry, the pharmaceutical industry, accountable. We also need to create access to treatment. And on this, I give great credit to Governor Wolf and the legislature for creating greater access to treatment. I was down in Congress last week lobbying them specifically on some federal changes, federal statutory changes to create more open beds and opportunity for treatment. I fundamentally believe that even with all of these efforts to arrest the dealers and go after the pharmaceutical industry and others, that we have to understand in this Commonwealth and in this country that drug addiction is a disease, not a crime.
Hey, I want to stop you here. Look, I've said this for a long time. There are a lot of people who get hopelessly addicted and go out and do dumb things. Sometimes they'll, as long as they don't have a weapon and a knife, if they, we've got to figure out how to deal with the problem as a disease and make sure they get appropriate treatment.
Yeah, the treatment's critical. Now listen, that doesn't apply to the dealers.
I understand.
It doesn't apply to the people
with you. I'm talking about
peddling this poison in our communities. But yes,
people
who are users, people who have gotten stuck in this cycle of addiction, we've got to figure out better ways to get them access to treatment.
Yeah, I think that's universally supported. I don't know why anyone wouldn't agree to that, and it's just not a question of money, although the money is important. It's the focus and the attention that all... Go ahead.
No, you're exactly right. Let me give you an example, because, look, I'm a careful steward of tax dollars. Here's an example where you don't need to go out and spend more money. There is an insane federal law that exists today from the 1950s that says Medicaid won't reimburse for drug treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, in facilities where you have 16 beds or more. I mean, it literally is holding us back from creating access to treatment here in central Pennsylvania and across the Commonwealth. I was lobbying our federal partners to change that law. It's a bipartisan effort working with Republican and Democratic congressmen and senators. We got to get that done. I've also lobbied the Trump administration. President Trump said that he was going to declare a national emergency. He said it, I think retweeted it or something, never actually signed the paperwork. He could sign the paperwork, do away with this 16-bed limit, and open up thousands of beds across the United States immediately for treatment. We need that treatment.
I want to thank you for coming on. You have an open invitation, to come in and chat with us and our viewers about these important issues, and we'll see you soon.
Great.
Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Terry.
All right, coming up, Marc Levy, Associated Press. How about this? Big stories of the week. We do have a governor's election going on. You might not be aware of it yet. If in case you're not, we'll bring you up to date on that and more.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, Marc Levy joins me. He's with the Associated Press. We're going to get into a bunch of subjects here. Let's start out first with the governor's election. Not a lot of news about that. The focus has been on the U.S. Senate race. There are 4 Republicans, members of the congressional delegation from Pennsylvania. They said, we're not seeking re-election. Time for that later, but let's start with the governor's race. Now, there were first there were one, then a two, and now there are three candidates, right?
Now there's
so
three
what's
candidates.
going on there?
So we have a lawyer from Pittsburgh named Laura Ellsworth who's jumped into the race. She's fairly prominent in business and civic circles in Pittsburgh. She's done some big-time legal cases there. She chaired the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce. She had a couple of appointments by Tom Corbett when he was the Republican governor of Pennsylvania. So yeah, so she's well known there.
Primary, Republican primary, right?
Right. So she may be more of a moderate than the two men who are already running, Scott Wagner and Paul Mango. She, for instance, wrote in the name of John Kasich in last year's election. That he's the Ohio governor.
Oh, sure.
But there's also a wild card out there. People keep wondering if the House Speaker, Mike Turzai, is going to run for governor. He said in the spring that he was seriously considering it. He's been silent about it since,
right.
But he keeps, letting it hang out there like he might.
Right. So we have Paul Mango, who's a former healthcare executive or consultant, I think. He's a candidate, the most high-profile candidate. We're not predicting winners and losers at the moment. Is a state senator from York County, Scott Wagner. Say a couple things.
So Scott Wagner is an atypical candidate. He before he was a state senator, he was funding candidates, Republican candidates who challenged Republican incumbents. He's a conservative. He has made millions after starting two waste hauling companies. He's an unusual guy because he won his state Senate seat by beating the party-endorsed candidate for it.
In a write-in?
In a write-in. He is still critical of Republican leadership in the legislature.
Yeah.
He's very supportive of Donald Trump. So you see similarities there. Now, he's also interesting because he said that he would support an increase in the minimum wage, not to $15, but maybe a much more
and he's
a much smaller increase.
And he's not a social conservative either on some issues like gay rights, as I understand it. Is that your sense too?
He's not a fire-breathing social conservative. In fact, he helped advance legislation through his committee that would have offered more protections to gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people in the workplace. So he breaks the Republican line on some of those issues. He's interesting.
So does Trump.
So does Trump. And Scott Wagner's unusual too because he's got a lot of money. So he put $4 million of his own dollars into this race.
And we saw how a lot of millions of dollars in a campaign helped one Governor Wolf, correct?
His name is Tom Wolf, and he's the governor now. Yep.
That's correct. All right, let's jump to another subject, and that is the U.S. Senate race is kind of fascinating. Senator Casey seeking a third term as United States Senator from, obviously, Pennsylvania. He was elected twice as Auditor General, once as State Treasurer. Pretty popular within the Democratic Party circles. Didn't have a tough time in these elections. But he has drawn a pretty high profile. Well, there are other people, but there's one high profile candidate, Congressman Lou Barletta from the 11th Congressional District. What do we know about Barletta?
So Lou Barletta made his name as a hardcore, hardline, anti-immigrant mayor of Hazleton, which is in Luzerne County. He crafted ordinances there that were enacted that would punish employers for hiring illegal immigrants, would punish people for offering housing to illegal immigrants. Now, ultimately, they were struck down by courts. They were never fully enacted or fully enforced. Other communities around the country adopted them.
Hold that thought. Well, I want to continue with this. We're going to run to a quick break, and then we'll get back with Marc Levy, and we'll talk about the Senate race and see where else we can get to before the end of the program.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
All right, Marc Levy and I are from Marc's with the Associated Press. We're chatting now. We've turned our attention to what will be a pretty high-profile race. Lou Barletta, congressman from the 11th Congressional District, is one of several candidates likely to challenge Bob Casey. We're focusing on Barletta. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so Barletta, it's clear that that he has the support of Donald Trump. And so since Lou Barletta got into the race, you've seen other people who had already announced to run getting out of the race.
Okay.
And that could continue. You do have one candidate who's showing no signs of getting out. His name is Paul Addis. He's an energy business guy from southeastern Pennsylvania. He's very anti-Trump. So it'll be interesting to see whether, what kind of support he can pick up particularly in the southeastern
with the
part of the state.
More moderate
right,
Republicans.
That very heavily voted against Donald Trump in the presidential election.
But here's the other point. Senator Casey has moved further to the left over the last, 5 or 6 years, more pronounced since Donald Trump was elected. His party's there, let's be candid, so he's in conjunction with his party. We have a candidate in Lou Barletta who's the quintessential Trump supporter. This is clearly going to be a referendum on the President of the United States played out in our state. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I'll defer to you. You're the expert on that. But it's clear that the only thing anyone talks about is Donald Trump. It just dominates the conversation. It dominates conversations among friends, among politicians, among consultants. And the one thing I will say is that there are a number of Republican political campaign consultants out there and strategists who worry about a Republican candidate who is very close to Trump, about that candidate's chances in Pennsylvania in next year's general election.
That's a great point. But Lou Barletta is not going to move away from his support for Trump. I mean,
he's very close with Trump. In fact, he co-chaired Donald Trump's campaign in Pennsylvania. He was co-chairing Donald Trump's campaign in Pennsylvania while many of the party's political brass were still fretting about Donald Trump.
Excellent.
Pat Toomey, the U.S. Senator, spent months essentially running against Donald Trump.
Great point. All right, we're just about out of time. Is the budget, I have to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Is the legislature going to do anything about providing the funds to cover the budget, or is Governor Wolf just going to keep borrowing money from places like the Liquor Control Board?
Wolf has basically said, I am going to find ways to balance the budget myself, at least for this fiscal year. He's borrowing money. He's trying to find ways to cut expenses. But, there's going to be a vote in committee in the House of Representatives on Monday in which you could see a Marcellus Shale tax bill emerge from Finance Committee, which is not a place there's been a vote before on this bill.
Right.
So,
and that's been the shale tax has been a tough sell in the House of Representatives. The Senate passed, I think, a 1% one in conjunction with Governor Wolf, and go ahead.
And thus far, House Republican leadership has opposed any Marcellus Shale tax bill. They've found ways to block it from getting to the floor. And, no one knows whether this is going anywhere, but one of the bottom lines here is that $650 million for 5 big schools is held up. So that's money that's not going to those schools right now.
All right, we'll have you back. You got to keep updating us on this. It doesn't seem to be going very far. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.